Good morning, kindergarten friends. Welcome to Bible Story Time. Today we will be reading a story, a very interesting story, about the Apostle Paul, el Apóstol Pablo. He has a very, very interesting story, so pay attention and listen carefully. Very soon, people started to notice how the members of this new church, the church that Jesus left behind, looked after each other and took care of others. People wanted to be a part of it. They were excited about God and excited about His church. Well, not everyone was excited about it. There was a man called Saul who hated what was happening. He wanted to stop it before it could get any bigger. So he hunted, he looked for people who loved Jesus and put them all in prison and prisión. Saul was an enemy to God, but God had a plan for him. One day, Saul was traveling with some friends to a city called Damascus in search of Jesus' followers. But as he was walking along the road, a bright, blinding light flashed down from the sky. It was all around him, and it was so bright that Saul couldn't see a thing. Then he heard a voice say, "Saul, why are you doing this to me?" "Who are you?" said Saul. "I am Jesus," said the voice. "Go into the city, and you will be told what to do." The light disappeared. Saul's friends were confused. They had heard the same voice, but they hadn't seen anything. Saul stood up and opened his eyes. He couldn't see. He was blind. His eyes were like this. They were shut. He couldn't see. His friends had to help him by holding his hands as they walked into Damascus. In the same city, God had told a man called Ananias to go and find Saul. Ananias loved God, but he did not like this idea at all. He knew that Saul hated God's people, and that meant that Saul hated him too. But God told Ananias that he had a plan for this enemy, a surprising plan. He was going to change Saul's heart and use him to tell the story of God's love to people everywhere. Saul was going to become someone who loved God instead of hating him. He was going to teach God's people instead of hurting him. Because Ananias loved God, he did what he was asked. Ananias put his hands on Saul and said, "Jesus has sent me to you so that you can see again and have the gift of his Holy Spirit." Suddenly, Saul could see again. God had healed his eyes, and he had also changed Saul's heart. Now Saul wanted to help God's church instead of arresting Jesus' followers. He wanted to be their friend. The people in Damascus were amazed. "Is this the same man who used to hate God's people?" they asked. It was. God had changed Saul. And now he could tell others that Jesus was the new king, the Son of God. Because Saul had changed so much, he wanted to change his name too. So he became Paul instead of Saul. Paul traveled far and wide telling people about Jesus and helping them to follow God and live close to Him. Small groups of followers grew in many different places. New churches made up of people that loved God and wanted to follow Him. Paul wrote letters to all these churches, helping people understand how Jesus wanted them to live. He taught them how to love God, obey Him, and love each other. God had set apart a tribe to show the world who He was. He had sent Jesus to show the world how much He loved them. And now He was sending Paul out into the world to start telling that story to everyone, everywhere. So this was the story of the Apostle Paul. He used to be a man that hated God's people, that hated the people that loved Jesus. And then he had this encounter with God, and that light blinded him, and he couldn't see. But then God changed his heart and his mind, and he went everywhere telling people about Jesus and how big his love was and what God has been doing and will continue doing with us. This was the story for today about Paul. I hope you found it to be a very interesting story. I think it is a very interesting story because he had a very, very, very big transformation. Before he hated God's people, and then he loves God. And it's very amazing how God can do these things to make people that used to hate him love him. It's very incredible, and it shows that no matter what you do, no matter where you are, no matter who you are, God has a plan for you. Lo que yo aprendí de esta historia es que no importa quién tú seas, a dónde estás, ni lo que estás haciendo, Dios tiene un plan para ti. Dios tiene un plan para ti, y si a ti no te gustan las cosas de Dios, Dios va a cambiar eso y va a hacer que tú lo ames a Él, igual como hizo con Pablo. Así que yo espero que te haya gustado esta historia, que te haya parecido interesante, porque a mí me parece súper interesante, y que hayas aprendido mucho de eso. Nos vemos después.